Thanks for tuning in. You are listening to the 5-Star Brain Software Podcast with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. Coming to you from Toronto, Canada, this is episode 124. Today we're talking all about how to use hypnosis and NLP to change yourself, your life, and the lives of others. So let's get started. Please welcome to the Hypnodrome, a man who now owns a piece of Milton Erickson's house.
Hurrah!
A man who has just completed the first ever wizard school training, and a man who knows how to pause in all the right places.
Just did.
Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Mandel.
Hello. What's going on? What's all this shouting? We'll have no trouble here.
Oh, I think we need to hear from you, Mike. A very special question.
What's that, buddy? Whatever happened to this old tranquility we used to know?
These are days of victory.
Oh, they are, buddy.
There we go.
We're on a victorious high. Things are going good.
We are having a great time. We've just finished, as we talked about in the quick intro here, we just finished our first ever advanced hypnotherapy training weekend, which we lovingly call Wizard School.
And why do we call it that, buddy?
Because people really do develop wizard tools. Now, this was not a
no, that's
school.
not the reason.
Okay, go ahead.
Real,
Hogwarts.
The
cafeteria looks like Hogwarts.
The cafeteria at St.
But
Michael's College looks like
Mike,
Hogwarts.
years ago, when we didn't even know about the cafeteria,
I
think it was actually on this podcast when you said to me, I think we need to do a class in advanced hypnotherapy techniques. We should make it a weekend, and we'll call it Wizard School. And the thing is, we didn't do it for about 4 years, and then our student and good friend Elliot, so credit to him, he was the one who kept pushing. When's Mike going to do it? Anyway, we did it. Student and good friend Elliot, probably rolling in some of the stories from that weekend into this episode and the next one, because this is going to be a 2-part series on change work. So it'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, it was great. It was a great weekend. And if you're listening, pay attention, because we will be, if you're on our email list, we will be announcing how to pre-order the videos if that's something that interests you, but more on that at another time. For now, I want to make sure that I mention that we have this class still coming up. That's June 24th through 28th, which is a Monday to Friday.
Still some spots.
It's well over half full at this point, and this usually is the time when orders accelerate. People say, hey, I think I can make it, and then anyway, it'll be sold out pretty soon. The other thing is, when this goes live, should be...
You're supposed to nudge them to want to come to...
Come on out.
Come on. Don't just say, we got this thing coming up.
No, come on out. It's on. Yeah, there you go. Right. But... even sooner. So when this is published, I believe on Friday, May 3rd, which should be the date that we're publishing this podcast, we will be 1 week away from Freddie and Anthony Jacquin joining us in Toronto for that Power Weekend training. So make sure you head on over to MikeMandelHypnosis.com/events to check out what's coming down the pipeline, because there's going to be some great stuff. And also, I want to mention, I don't think we've really talked about this too much. Super quick, I want to reference the fact that we did put together a really fun deck of hypnotic playing cards, standard poker cards. Every single card has a conversational hypnotic language pattern on it. Right. It was designed by Mike and by me, but mostly by Mike. He wrote all the language patterns for the cards, which was fun. And they're available on our website. They're really low cost, they're fun, and there's a special prize when you buy them. Anyway, you can find those at MikeMandelHypnosis.com/cards. All right, on with the show.
Well, there's something I want to mention right off the bat here, Chris. I had a birthday yesterday, and it was a key birthday. 66 freaking years on this planet, man. Yeah. How is that possible? And I celebrated with a big honkin' submarine sandwich, which I never eat, and then went to Red Lobster and got the ultimate feast with my wife, and I just had a great evening. But yeah, closer to 70 than 60 by a bit now. And it's weird, because my wife pointed out a while ago, she said, I am older now, considerably older now than John Grinder was when I studied with him. No wonder I got all this credibility. I've become this wonderful.
You are an old wizard, Mike.
5,000 years old.
Yeah, tons.
So that's cool. But my birthday, I have to point out, people were very, very kind to me. One of our students, Richard, brought things for Chris and I, brought these amazing tea mugs
Right.
and homemade pickles. Our friend Harris came in from San Francisco to study at Wizard School. He brought me an amazing pair of bookends that turn your bookshelf into the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yes.
And he gave you a Golden Gate Bridge desk ornament that you can use to put a picture of one of your daughters,
Yes.
Vorelaya
Or both of them.
or Sandusky in. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very kind of
It was
Harris.
very nice. And Maggie, we got to say, Maggie set up a bag of stuff for me that replicated
it was all podcast related.
all the Henry Squatter stuff was in
Yeah.
this bag. A piece of
Everything
iron
was
from
wrapped in brown paper.
brown paper. She gave a bottle of vinegar and a
Yeah.
brush. She could paint it all with vinegar.
Yeah.
There was the iron from the iron merchants speaking brilliant. I mean, she went
It was the
so
best.
much trouble in this. It was incredible.
Yeah.
And then our friend, Lisa gave me an amazing card. I can't even repeat. It's just too funny. But our dear friend, David Fairweather, gave me one of the greatest presents of my life. Guys, he gave me this box and presented it in front of the class. And he said, this is a brick from Milton Erickson's house in Phoenix. And I thought he was joking. And when I got home, I looked at the packaging and it had shipped from the Milton Erickson Foundation in Phoenix. And when I got it out of the box, I noticed something I hadn't seen at first. There's a plaque on the side of it with Elizabeth Erickson's signature, calling it a piece of hypnotic history, giving the address.
It is very much.
When they knocked the house down to build a parking paved Milton Erickson's house, put up a parking lot. Anyway, they did that. And some of the bricks that did not get crushed and broken, and apparently there weren't many, they sold. And so here's
Quite brilliant.
But here's why I'll put a lid on this whole point now. We'll get on with the podcast. But that was Saturday. He gave it to me. My birthday was Monday. Sunday morning, I woke up for the second day of Wizard School. I woke up knowing something wonderful had happened, but I couldn't remember what it was. Like when you wake up on your birthday or Christmas Day. And I went, the brick.
Yeah.
And I went running downstairs thinking, damn it, I better not have dreamed this.
Yeah.
And I looked, and there was and I yelled at my wife, I got a piece of Milton Erickson's house. It was just fantastic. We brought his house to me.
It is very, very cool. Okay, let's move on. Mike, I want you to give us an introductory statement on what this podcast and the next is all about. How are we going to tie in some really awesome content for our listeners?
Well, we want to talk about change work.
Okay.
And how you can change other people, how you can change yourself. We're going to go back into that. And because we spent an entire weekend working with 30 amazing therapists and hypnotists from as far away as Austria and San Francisco and England and New York, they came to Toronto and studied. And a lot of the stuff that came out in Wizard School, which is all advanced hypnotherapy techniques, advanced techniques to change people, we can draw from that to give you some really good content for the rest of you who are listening who didn't attend Wizard School. So you sort of get some ideas.
And even for those of you who are not hypnotists and just want to use some of the ideas here to do work on yourself.
Okay, so what I'm thinking of here is one of the things that comes up very, very often with hypnosis is direct suggestion in hypnosis, DSIH, versus regression therapy. And this has become a polarized point with people, and it didn't have to. There's no reason for it. There's the entire group that use nothing but direct suggestion in hypnosis. And this is where you simply get someone into a powerful trance, you find out what they want, and you give them suggestions into their unconscious mind so that this will come about in one way or another. It can be quite authoritarian, depending on how it's done, or it can be quite permissive. But the bottom line is, people sort of, those who are big on regression, taking people back to the initial sensitizing event, activating event, whatever, usually the initial sensitizing, sometimes it is the activating event, and processing the past to set people free, a lot of them don't like the entire thought of even using direct suggestion. I've heard people almost throw it out like it's not necessary, when in reality, Bernheim and Lebo did amazing work using nothing but direct suggestion.
Who are Bernheim and Lebo, for those listening who don't know?
Bernheim and Lebo. Bernheim was a neurologist in Nancy, France in the 1800s. He did a lot of work at the clinic there. He and Lebo built the Nancy School of Hypnosis, and they did a lot of work dealing with neurological issues and physical pain and all kinds of things, and all they did was direct suggestion.
Okay, so by direct suggestion, of course, we're talking about put somebody in, let's use very authoritative induction here. So let's say like a Dave Elman style induction.
Right.
Okay, wonderful. Now we have somebody in a nice deep trance, and we simply tell them how they will change.
Yes, and you'll start sleeping through the night
right.
perfectly, like this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it is a very useful thing. Now, the regressionists, and remember, Chris and I do all this stuff, the regressionists want to take you back to the initial sensitizing event and clear up the past first. Now, you can clear it up with timeline therapy or regression or whatever. Now, they are different things, really aspects of the same thing. I'm not going to use direct suggestion if the person has a traumatic event that triggered this whole list of behaviors that they don't want, or symptomology, whatever.
I like the metaphor that you use for this.
Yeah, and the metaphor is if you have a cut on your arm, the doctor can suture it up, clean it and suture the wound, and that's direct suggestion. If you have a cut in your arm, but it's because it's a piece of shrapnel in your arm, you don't want a doctor who's going to clean it and suture it up without taking the shrapnel out. And that's the using regression, getting to the cause to remove it. So they both have a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Utility, a lot of utility.
Yeah.
You just have to depend on this. You have to look at the situation. So even if you're doing regression, you are still hopefully going to close the session with a lot of direct suggestions.
I was just going to bring this up. It's not an either or.
Right.
It's usually both. If you're going to use regression, you're still probably going to do direct suggestion at the end to build an empowering future anyway, right?
Yes.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about what
something.
regression actually is like too.
Okay.
So let's say let's take an example maybe from some of the work we've done recently.
Okay. So let's say one of the subjects that we had in the last week working at Tony's clinic when we shot these for MMHA. Right. The first one who came in, we won't give his name, very nice guy. He had some self-confidence issues, all in the realm of social anxiety.
That's
so
right.
He
we'll
was
keep
a
this very
salesman.
private, of course.
Yes, he was a salesman, is really, really skilled, knows his stuff, is a confident salesman. But when he got into social settings, like say a small group, a party at someone's house.
Something that wasn't work related where the topic of discussion was natural.
Yes.
Natural.
Yes. Absolutely right bringing that up. When it was just normal discussion points, not to do with selling, he would get tongue-tied. He'd go silent. He would feel like he didn't know what to say.
Exactly.
Which, of course, becomes self-magnifying, self-replicating, gets stronger and stronger, and he wouldn't even want to go to those events.
Right.
And he did not know when it started. He didn't have a specific time. But I suspected that there was something in his past that when he was put in a social setting would put an unresourceful ego state in the executive.
Right.
Or he'd just feel bad. Let's make it real easy. So if you remember, Chris, the method I used was to regress him unconsciously to the event. So
back
not
to the
even
first
in his
time.
conscious awareness, taking him back to the very first time it happened and setting up idiomotor finger signals so that we could tell when he was there, he'd lift the yes finger and so on, would run the event that caused all this problem from beginning to end and stop. And then he ran it again from beginning to end.
Unconsciously. So not even necessarily being consciously aware.
But what he did do was one finger, the no finger, would rise every time there was negative emotion in the event that he couldn't even consciously remember. And as you'll recall, his fingers were going crazy.
Yeah, the fingers, interestingly, when you're doing this, in case you didn't hear what Mike said, idiomotor signaling is the method we're using here. So you're telling the person in advance that this finger's going to represent yes, this finger's going to represent no, or whatever it is.
So idea produces motion. Yeah.
And then you're using hypnosis, you're regressing the person back to the very first time they had that feeling, let's say, right? Or the issue that caused
the very first time, which is the effect bridge.
And then you're having them run through the event that was uncomfortable using these signals, and the no finger simply signaling a negative response, some sort of negative emotion.
Right, it's marking this out.
And here's the cool thing. Yeah, when you run it the first time, the finger's moving quite, I don't want to say violently, but it's like those old school when you had a cassette player and the magnetic meter that would show how
the
volume,
meter.
Those nowadays everything's electronic, but you know what I mean, the peak indicator. Or nowadays, it's the finger almost moves in an analog manner, so that the first time you're running through these events, the finger's moving quite
jaggedly and aggressively.
Quite aggressively. And then
but the subsequent times we ran it, still unconsciously, we're seeing it less and less.
Yeah, and it becomes a way to calibrate that you get in change.
And what this is doing is regressing him unconsciously to the start of this negative situation. And by running it unconsciously, every time he does, even though he's not aware of what's happening, we are reducing the negative emotion because you have to do three things. You must free the person from the negative emotions. You must make it rational to their conscious mind or to their intellectual mind. And you've got to keep all the learnings from the event so that, if I work with a rape victim, and I want to make sure that they've learned the lesson of not going through a dangerous place alone at night or something like that, right?
Do you know, this is a really good time to bring up often seen email that'll come in and it'll say something like, can you help me forget X, whatever X is, something that they don't want to remember because remembering it affects their life.
Yeah.
And no, we don't ever do that.
No.
We never cause people to forget things that happened. Because why is it that you would want to forget that in the first place? Well, because it's really disturbing. Okay, how about we just take away the disturbance?
Mm-hmm. Take away the pain and leave the intellectual understanding of what occurred. So that's what's happening with him with this event. It's much more ecological. But I'm checking in with his unconscious, and notice after he'd run it, I asked if his unconscious was willing to let him consciously know what it was, and it said no.
No, in the beginning
it
said no. That's right.
And then it said no right to the end.
Yeah.
And I checked.
That's right, yes.
Is there still more negative emotion to remove? And it said yes. We just run it again.
Yeah.
Until he got relief from this. Now, this is the guy who just... I started running with tears.
This is a very common thing. You always want to have Kleenex handy, but not handed to the person in advance to presuppose that they're going to cry or something.
Freak them out,
but it's very common that tears will come up, and people won't even necessarily know what the heck is coming up consciously.
Right, and this is a very useful way of doing regression. This goes back to David Cheek and Leslie Lecron being the father of videomotor signaling. By running it unconsciously, you can get to all kinds of things without the person abreacting to the degree of
not a
out
crazy
kind of thing.
abreaction, just a sort of very manageable abreaction.
Right, and each time you're releasing the
processing
pressure valve.
Emotion. Yeah, that's a nice metaphor. It's like you're taking if the emotions are high pressure cooker and you're just slowly letting the steam out.
Right.
You're reducing the pressure, i.e. the power that those emotions hold over you.
Yes, and at the end of it, of course, I'm now going to switch to direct suggestion.
Exactly, and
hypnosis.
that's where we got into this. So that's where you're going to now...
And I'll build in the learnings, and you've learned from the experience. Even learning unconsciously will do it. They don't have to know consciously.
And this won't bother you at all. In fact, you'll be very comfortable with knowing that this past event is over. You're past it.
Yes, you are empowered now and strong, and I'll give them a lot of nominalizations. You're a survivor now.
Yeah.
You are, a powerful person. You feel confident.
Yeah,
anyway,
there are people
it's a wonderful
who love
thing.
you. You're a respected and wonderful person,
All
and
this
you're
to-
going to live a great life. You just go on and on with
But
that.
all
for a
this
few
to
minutes.
say that any kind of regression to the past, to clear up the past, it's not always needed, but when it is needed,
Take that
direct
shrapnel out.
suggestion won't be sufficient. You've got to you got to pull the shrapnel out,
Yeah, if
and then
direct
suture.
suggestion is like the suturing, just pull the shrapnel out first, and that's your regression. That's your regression / it could be other things too, I suppose.
Right,
but
and
yeah.
the thing is, it tends to last as well. Let's stay with this topic for a moment here. One of the ways I clear things is using timelines. And we're clearing events in the past. We're regressing into the past. Now, I'm not doing direct suggestion with this, but I'm letting the person determine where the past, present, and future are for them first.
This is worth paying very close attention to, people, because this is now going to segue us into a bit of a discussion on how you can use some of this stuff on yourself, because you don't have to go into a deep trance. You don't have to have somebody else hypnotize you. We're talking about the use of space and time and timelines here.
Right. Now, realize time, the whole concept of time, Richard Bandler's talked on this extensively. Connie Ray and Stephen Andreas have taught on this. It's great, and Tad James has his really good training, timeline therapy, which is his trademark form of this, which I highly recommend. And what it really comes down to is we work with time and space in our minds. We are four-dimensional beings in that sense, and everybody has to have a way of knowing when something happened. Like if I think of my birthday, how do I know it was yesterday and not 50 years ago that I'm thinking of? There's got to be a way.
That's a really good question.
When I arrived here at your place today in Hypno East, how did I know when to get here? Well, because it was a slightly future event. We store things geographically in space. And those of you listening, do this test right now. Not if you're driving or operating heavy machinery or doing surgery, but
only if it's safe
if it's
for
safe
you
to
do
so.
this. Yeah.
Ask yourself, if you were to ask your unconscious mind, which direction, where the past is to you, which way would you point? Just do it. See which way you point. Which way is the past? And if
First instinct.
And if you were to ask your unconscious mind which direction the future is for you, which way would you point? And then point and see where the future is. And then the question becomes, where is the present? Where is now? And you'll report either it's where you are, like for me, the present is right where I am at this moment underneath this chair, or it might be in front of you. And now put all of that together so it forms a line with your distant future and your past when you were born and where the present is, and that becomes your timeline.
Mm-hmm.
What's your timeline like?
My timeline is pretty much like a U shape in front of me, with now being directly in front of me.
Interesting. So no wonder
Very
you're
close to me.
that
Correct.
you're so organized, and that's called a through-time timeline.
Yeah.
Where it's like a U or even a V in front of you with the past on the right, I would suspect for
Yeah,
you.
past is
left-
my past is on my left.
Even though
still.
you're left-handed.
Yeah, because I think unconsciously it just makes sense to me the way that a book is read left
Yes,
to right. So
yes.
the book, when you're reading, the words that are in the past for you are on the left side, and the words that are coming up in the future are on the right side. So to me, that's just the way my timeline is organized.
And the way you organize it. Oh, by the way, I just have to tell you something you hadn't expected, Chris. I have a quick bulletin here. The Gus Grissom update, which is he's not been spotted.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay,
there
so
you
we're
go.
back into it. So so now once you know how you organize time, the question is, does it work for you? So my timeline, the future is in front of me, just off to the right, very slightly. I'm in the present, and the past is behind me, just over my left shoulder. Now, if somebody keeps the past directly behind them, not off the shoulder like mine, but directly behind them, remember, this is how your brain is coding information. It's not imaginary.
It's not a right and wrong thing.
Right, and it's having an effect on your psychoneurology as well. Your brain is actually, through its plasticity, making shifts in your timeline. I mean, it's crazy stuff. But if your timeline is directly behind you, guess what? You will not learn from your mistakes.
Oh, isn't
because
that
the
interesting?
past is not readily available.
Because they're like, you can't see them.
That's right,
Yeah.
even though you're not seeing them. And that's why somebody who has a timeline like yours, Chris, where it's all in front of you, you can organize well, you can see the
isn't that
past and
interesting?
draw from
Yeah,
it.
I can stand back and look at it and go, oh, this stuff in my past, that was crappy. Let's not do that again.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I said in the class yesterday, find out what your timeline is like, because it will change you when you change it. You can shift things in it and see how you feel, or feel how you see.
Well, we did an experiment where we switched it. So let's say my timeline, which is, what did you call it again? I can never remember the difference. Through
in time or
and
through time. Yours is through. You're
Mine is
looking
through.
through
That's
it.
right.
Yeah.
And I switched it just to try it on to in time, and it felt so freaking weird to imagine my past being behind me and that the future is in front of me like a line going forward.
Interesting,
right?
yeah.
It just felt bizarre, and it wanted to snap back to the old way.
And that way, mine, the in time, is more like a film, more like a movie. I'm jumping into events, and the event runs like a film strip. Whereas you've got the book open in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's very useful, because we need you to stay organized.
Yes, we do.
I got to mention, I had a case in Sydney, Australia in 1995. And I was telling the class, I was sitting in a coffee shop with a guy, and this is a guy who was extremely creative, but he never got things together. His creativity was off the scale. I mean, remarkable. But he had no organizational skills, no way of pulling the trigger and actually taking action on things. And I elicited his timeline. Guess what it was? We told the class yesterday, or on the weekend, it was vertical, completely vertical.
Oh, I remember this story.
Covered
Yeah.
in broken glass and pieces of, jagged metal. And he said, and I'm walking on it with no boots.
Wonderful.
Does that motivate you to move forward?
That's
on anything?
super
Not at all.
empowering, man. Yeah.
Chris
I
is
just want to
being-
get stuff done now. Yeah.
Right. So I got him to sweep the glass and the metal off. And then I pulled the timeline flat and had it click. I pull it flat. And he said, oh, that feels better. And then he went, oh, it's just popped back up. So I did a trick where the Andreas has talked about this. You pull it flat, and you can either say, the sound of a BMW door
Tesla.
closing, or Tesla door closing, or Subaru, and that the sound of a door shutting locks it in place, or the sound of a Tupperware container snapping shut.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, that's better. And we're talking about, nope, it's popped back up again. So this guy had a polarity response. Even though all the broken glass did not reappear on it, it's still directly vertical in front of him, completely vertical. So I did the polarity response. I pulled it flat and then forced it back vertical and clicked it into place. And he said, oh, it's gone flat now. And
you're
that's
like,
what it took.
"That's
So
right."
it stayed there after that.
Yeah.
So when you change your timeline, it will change your life. And one of the things we did in our class is we had people soaring above their own timeline, finding traumatic events, releasing all the negative emotions from them, then coming back to now and trying on different timelines. We had one guy in our class, Kyle, I don't think he'd mind me saying his name, and he came in the next day and he said, my handwriting has changed since I changed my timeline.
Oh, that's weird.
And I went like this in my hands, like I widened my hands out, and I said, showing his handwriting, it opened up. And he said, yes. I said, I could tell from your response and what you'd done to the timeline, the effect it would have in your handwriting. His handwriting was really uptight.
Yeah.
And by loosening it and spreading it
More
out into
relaxed.
garlands, he was more relaxed.
Isn't that
even the
interesting?
writing changed because he changed the timeline.
Yeah, and I remember who you're talking about. He's had some profound changes in his life, which is
He's
just
done
totally
some
awesome.
amazing stuff.
Okay, so we're going to come back to this in the second part of this series. So this is episode 124. Episode 125, we will continue discussing a bit more about this. But before we wrap it up and move on to the closing, I want to make sure we give people a few nuggets. So let's just briefly discuss. If somebody elicits their timeline and then they imagine with their eyes closed, probably easier, float up above that timeline, see your entire timeline. When you say look for trauma, it doesn't necessarily show up as like, an axe or sitting there.
Yeah.
It could be, what could it look
Dark
like?
spots.
Dark spots.
If you have a lot of dark
uneven.
spots in your past, over your past timeline, I would guess there's either trauma there, not always, or you don't have memory of your childhood. You don't have good memory of your childhood.
And so what can people do when they see, let's say they do this exercise, they go, oh, there's a dark spot. Should they ask themselves, what age does that feel like it would be at? Or should they just fix the dark spot?
They should attempt to brighten the entire timeline.
Brighten the whole thing.
And see how...
And just
see
what
how
happens.
they feel.
Okay, so there you go. So,
Yeah.
and report back to us. Let
and
us
if you
know
don't
how
like
this works
it,
for you.
change it back
Yeah.
again. You can always hit an undo button and bring anything back.
Okay, so in the next episode, let's continue on. Let's
Let
talk.
me one more thing before
Go
you say
ahead.
that. One other thing you might want to do is if your timeline is really short in front of you,
Lengthen
that's
it.
programming yourself
Yeah.
for not a very
Early
long
death.
life. Let it extend, loosen up a bit, and push it way further out and brighten it, and notice how comfortable that is.
Okay, so if you're listening to this episode 124, we urge you to practice this. Before you go on, if you happen to have just found our podcast and 125 is already out, don't skip ahead and listen to 125 quite yet. Do the exercise. Elicit your timeline. Maybe play around with it. Switch the timeline. See how it feels. If you like the new timeline, maybe change it, adopt it. And then do the exercise we discussed. Hover up high above your timeline. Look down. Look for dark spots or whatever is a different. Notice whatever difference you notice. And then if you're not comfortable with, let's say, those dark spots, brighten them up, change the timeline a way that you might think feels better. And if it does, leave it that way. If you don't like it, change it back.
Experiment
and
with
let us know what you find. And then go on to episode 125 at some point down the road. once you're ready.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfectly.
So in 125, we're going to continue on. We're going to start by going through how this actually changes the brain. And then we'll talk about a few more examples that we've done recently.
Yeah,
For
some of the
example,
things we've
Wizard
seen,
School
yeah.
class. And then we have some other good stuff lined up for you. So
when
with
you give us
that,
the empowering question,
I think we can move on to today's empowering question. So here we go. Ask yourself, what aspect of your life are you most excited about using to help other people? And how will you begin today? So what aspect of your life are you just absolutely thrilled about using to help other people and perhaps yourself? And how will you begin doing that with excitement today?
Nicely done, Chris. I'll follow that with today's Meta 5, which is the story of Busy and the Scrim.
Busy in the Scrim.
Now, when I had the space show and was touring, this is a road story, was touring doing hypnosis with the big stage show that turned the set. It turned the stage into the bridge of a starship.
Okay.
So it was a two-hour show, and it got longer and longer and longer. My manager was saying, "Oh, he does a 2.5 to 3 hour show." I'm saying, "Will you stop saying that?
Shut
Let me get
up."
on
Yeah.
stage." That's why I went back to 90 minutes. But we traveled, so I had a road crew of 2 sound and lighting guys, pyrotechnicians. They could do all that stuff. My manager traveled as well with us, so there were 3 of them working on setting this up. It would take about 3 hours to set everything up. Computerized dissolves, rear projection screens, an 8-foot by 8-foot fiber optic panel, which they believe, made in Las Vegas, they believe was the first time fiber optics were used for entertainment. And it would make this flying through space effect. But I would appear on stage every show. So we had the people on stage in trances. We've already done the first part, the mentalism part. And in front of this 8-foot fiber optic panel is a scrim curtain, a heavy curtain in an arc. And sewn into it were little colored LEDs individually put in by hand. And so what would happen is I would beam onto the stage. Our soundtrack would start. We had a flash bomb that would go off directly in front of this. When that went off, people would be blinded because this was all in the dark for a fraction of a second. Busy, who was backstage just to the side, had this rope. When the flash bomb went, he would pull this rope. The scrim curtain would whip back out of the way, and I'd be standing there. The lights would come up, and everybody would go nuts. That's what's supposed to happen. On one night in Niagara Falls, Ontario, St. Catharines, Ontario, here's what actually happened. We're waiting. So all the music, where H.G. Wells and Jules Verne left off, Mike Mandel continues, we have the power to take you there. Energize! So the scrim curtain starts twinkling, and all the sound of energy, and the kids in the audience are going, like this. Like it was really amazing, this 3D twinkling thing appearing. Flash bomb does not go off. The squib that fired it didn't work. So the pyro guy backstage is frantically trying to get it to go off. I'm looking over my shoulder. I realize we are past the point in the music now. He has to pull the freaking curtain without the flash bomb. So I'm looking up from behind the curtain. I'm going, pull the rope, pull the rope. I see Busy holding the rope, just completely paralyzed. He's stuck with two thoughts. One of them is, I'm supposed to wait for the bomb to go off. Then I pull it. The other one is, this is my boss.
Yeah.
And he's stuck. He's stuck. And the lights come up. And then Busy pulls the thing, and it goes back. And I hear someone say, nice try. It was an absolutely horrible show.
Oh, that's horrible. But that does sound like a really cool design. All right. Thanks for sharing that, Mike. And thank you all for listening to the Brain Software Podcast. This has been episode 124.
And we'll be back
with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. And go on over to MikeMandelHypnosis.com. Check out the Brain Software ebook that's on the homepage for you. And if you're so inclined and you would love to own a custom cool deck of poker cards with hypnotic language patterns on them, visit MikeMandelHypnosis.com/cards. And of course, if you're interested in training with us live and in person, make sure you check out our events page at MikeMandelHypnosis.com/events. We will talk to you again in episode 125. Thanks again, and good night!
Mr. Thompson, I will tell you the most wonderful story of Henry Squatter and the Death Mask.
I haven't heard this one.
Oh, it's remarkable. Really interesting. In the early days, the war had been going on for some time. We used to get breaks and go back to London, back into England from France. And one afternoon, Bryce Morgan, and I remember a couple of the other chaps were there. Peter Fitzwadsworth Smythe was there, and I think Johnny Layfield Yachts Woe, and Guy Billingham and Ray Houston, and of course Henry Squatter. Oh, and I think Johnny Brookman Ding T. Larciar was there as well. And Bryce Morgan said, I say, chaps, let's have a look in here. And it was Madame Tussauds Wax Museum in London. And Bryce Morgan was a wonderful chap, paid for everyone. He used Squatter's money, if I recall, but he paid for everyone to go in and said he'd pay them back later, a shilling each. And we wandered all around the Chamber of Horrors and all these figures from the past. And then he saw a death mask from, it was Louis XIV or some damn thing. And Squatter said, hey, look at this, Bryce Morgan, these masks made of wax. Well, what's that all about? And Bryce Morgan said, well, when famous people die, they would sometimes pour wax over their faces, make a plaster cast of it, and use that so they could then remember exactly what they look like. And Squatter said, well, that's a damn stupid thing to do. Bryce Morgan said, no, not at all. In fact, it's recommended by Her Majesty that we should all have our own death masks made early so no one has to put wax on a dead body. And Squatter said, well, I wouldn't mind having it done then if Her Majesty wants it done. And which, of course, was the entire point. And so we got back over to France, and Bryce Morgan poured a load of wax over Squatter's face and took the impression the wax was scalding hot, which was rather funny. Well, later on, Bryce Morgan had gone over to Lord Melbury's for a party. And while they were all up in the garden shooting, going after grouse or something, Bryce Morgan crept upstairs and was giving Lady Melbury a damn good seeing to. And Lord Melbury got suspicious, came upstairs, burst the door open, and saw them in delicto flagrante, as it were. And they were just playing the Spaniard with her. But you're a lovely woman, as you know. But Bryce Morgan had contrived to make a Henry Squatter mask from the death mask. He had this on his face. And Lord Melbury said, oh, you bastard! Fired a shot at him. Bryce Morgan leapt out the window, ran back to the regimental headquarters. And, of course, Lord Melbury followed and saw Henry squatter and fired some birdshot into his rear end. Funniest damn thing, it took 2 hours for the surgeon to pick it out. So they had to anesthetize him. And when he was unconscious, Bryce Morgan fastened another flask of coffee to his arm and dripped him with caffeine. It was the funniest damn thing. I always loved the way he was such a kind man and so funny. He never did anything off color or wrong. He just a lovely person.